Hello everyone, and welcome to the Protrader ASX200 show. My name is Richard Baker, and I work with Protrader. Moving forward, the show will be released the first Tuesday of every month. The focus of the show is, as the name suggests, specifically about the ASX200 and how you can use the Protrader software for your portfolio management and how to help manage your SMSF. Now, each show will be around 20 minutes where we'll talk about the past month and what's happened with the market, but also what's on the horizon and what may impact the market moving forward. Now, on a side note, I also want you to be listening with this recording in conjunction with the Protrader monthly report that most of you should already be subscribed to, but if you're not, please go to our website. So now I'll try and show you the scans that I use and how I use the software to manage my portfolio, but also delve deeper into macro issues and then towards the end some specific stocks and specific market issues. Okay, so let's get into this. Now there are three very big themes that are presently impacting the market. First of all is the US-China trade negotiations, and that's really been going on certainly the last full financial year. We also have the US economy, and particularly the Federal Reserve and the interest rates, and what the likely move will be, and how that then in turn will affect the US economy. And finally, the other big element, the great unknown, has been the world economic growth, or specifically lack thereof, and how that may impact upon US earnings moving forward. Now, looking domestically, now using the XJO chart, and as I say, we're going to be looking at the XJO more than the All Ords, the XAO. We can see that the ASX200 really from for this calendar year, it's been up 6 straight months, which has been phenomenal. The June quarter it was up 7.1% alone, and in fact the ASX200 has been up around 19% this calendar year. It's been quite phenomenal. And throughout this period, the resources have looked particularly strong, and that comes down to really the underlying commodities prices. For instance, iron ore has been up 70% for the financial year, and gold was up around 12%. So moving forward, one question that we get asked very regularly is the process. What is the process that we use at Protrader? And so I try and combine a top-down and then bottom-up approach. So before I do any of my individual scans, there's 2 specific things that I do every single month. So the first of all, and look, what you may need to do is create some watch lists. So the first thing I do at the start of every month is that I go through every stock in the ASX top 20. And what that does is that it gives me an idea. So like you've got ANZ, BHP. It gives me an idea of what are the biggest stocks doing and how are they going in the market. And you can see actually very clearly just by clicking through, you can start seeing a degree of divergence in terms of how the banks have been going, like for instance NAB, and how stocks like Rio Tinto have been going over the last year. So with the resources, they've had a run and are in fact consolidating, and the banks have had a pretty good run. But what you'll start seeing is that they've started to come off a bit. I.e., for instance, look at NAB now, and Commonwealth Bank. And so they're starting to come off a bit, and you're possibly starting to struggle to hold on to those gains. Now, after going through, and as I say, I look at every single stock in the ASX 20. Now, after I've done that, and once again, please see the watch list here, I like to then cycle through and just have a bit of a look at the indexes, both internationally and domestically. And what this does is that this gives you an idea of where money is going. So, a classic example here is look at the Dow. So the Dow's, it had a bad period last year as they tailed off, and then it's had a phenomenal run. And once again, has broken through previous highs and has now actually reached new highs very recently. But you can look at the Dow Jones, in comparison with the Hang Seng, and you can see that the Dow's had higher highs and higher lows. Meanwhile, the Hang Seng has had lower lows and lower highs. And so it gives you a bit of an idea that, the markets are, where is money going, the flow of money internationally. And it's kind of transitioning a bit away from some of the other tech-heavy indexes and more to resource and industrial indexes like the US. Now, then after doing some international, I then like to go through our sub-ASX indexes. And once again, as I was saying, it gives you an idea of, of where money is going and how it's moving. So, for instance, I'm looking here at, let's say, the ASX200 resources, and you can see that, as we discussed this calendar year, it's just that has been just a stellar standout performance. And even though it had this channel period here, really from about April to June, but it's broken through again. And what is important here as well to look at is that it's now holding on to, this previous channel ceiling is now the new floor. And so one would expect that it may come back to this level of around the 4890. You'd hope that it would hover and then move forward from there. If you look at that compared with the financials, which is the XFJ, we can see that it's starting to really struggle, and it may pull back a bit and start kind of challenging these levels around the 6,067 level. Now, before I go into individual scans, a lot of people ask, how do we do our moving averages and how do we set our moving averages? And I believe Sam's also talked about that. So I'll just show you how I set my moving averages. So if you go into this cog icon, and it's actually called settings, and what you can then go is that you can then see in the cog icon, you can move, change a lot of things. And here we have the simple moving average. So the three that I like, the 50-day, the 100-day, and the 200-day moving average. And here you can change the colors. You can add more if you so wish. And then you just click OK. And so these three trend lines that you will see, this is the SMA there, and that is how you set them. So now with the scans, I only do 4 scans. 2 of them are from the Guru's Toolbox, and 2 of my own. So the first one I do is the Frank scan. I do this every month, and I simply go to the wand here, click on Guru's Toolbox, and click on Frank's pattern. Now, please note at this point, as with all of my scans, I have a preset watch list. And so, you'll see here I've got mining, I have NASDAQ, oil stocks, ASX20, and the ASX200. And so then I have the ASX full. And so I generally don't do the full market. I just do specific sectors. And in this case, it'll always be the ASX200. So I click on Frank's pattern, then I click scan, and then we just see, and see what comes up. Now, once I've done that, I then simply cycle through and try and find stocks that, interest me or meet certain of my own parameters that I think, okay, that could be could be very interesting. So we can see here that the CCP looks very interesting. Now, moving forward, because I will try and get through ones that I particularly like. So Northern Star is a classic example. Now, once I've found a stock that I've have interest in, I then like to change my time scale when I'm looking at a stock. So and this helps me to set my entry and my stop loss points. So in my starts. It also provides me with a different level of perspective, in terms of where has the stock been, where is it going, and where has it been in proportion to where it is now. So this is what I say, with my starts here, using the 3-month, and I can move this back and forth. And so this here is a start of 1192. I'm probably a tad more aggressive, and I think that if I look, there's certainly a bit of a floor there and a ceiling there. So I'll probably set my start at 1175. And that just for me is something that I feel comfortable with my stocks. And so once it hits that price, I'll then immediately buy some, I'd then probably probably immediately buy that stock. Now, also cycling through, you can go and see here once again, and we mentioned at the start, and use these in the indexes. We can see that Rio. Now, this is another stock that's been a great performer, and it's got the box, Frank's box, it's got here of 107 as being a start, and so that will now be on my list to keep a very close eye on. Another stock here is Sonic Healthcare. Now, this is, it's in a completely different sector, but once again, I like the fact that, to me, you can see that it'll have some really good support here, so that gives me a degree of confidence. If I look at the 5-year chart, okay, you can see once again it's really broken through this resistance level, and then going here using 3 months. So I may set a start there, let's say at around the 27.85 level, but it'll certainly now be on my lists that interest me. So after I have done Frank's scan, I then like to go back up and I do the SAM scan. That's the next scan that I always do. And I say, remember, I do this once a month, and this helps me narrow down the stocks that I'm going to keep an eye on. So I go to the wand icon, which is the Guru's Toolbox, and I hit the Sam's Davis box. Now, we can see here, this has already been preset, and please note, once again, with the filters, generally I don't have to worry about the filters because I'm using a watch list. And so that then, as I say, I'm not scanning the entire market. So with these ones, look, even if I didn't have to, untick only showed trading days, trade in the past 1 year, or I untick the ignore results that have less than 280 days. Generally, you won't find a stock in the ASX200 that hasn't. So the filters for me aren't that relevant, but they may be for you. So I'll then click scan. And once again, it's pretty much the same thing as with Frank, that I will just cycle through and find stocks that I find that are of interest to me. And it will also fit, as I say, my top-down approach. Now, a classic example, so BHP, you can see here, that's got 2 boxes. But a classic example would be Commonwealth Bank, CBA. Now, CBA is a great example of a macro-micro perspective. At the end of the day, I've only got so much money in my portfolio. So I can only have a certain amount of resources that I can allocate to a set number of stocks. Now, I personally have concerns about the finance sector, primarily due to interest rates, and there is some issues to do with the real estate market and how that may impact bad loans. And so I'm very cautious on the banks at the moment. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't buy banks or that one shouldn't buy banks. I'm just saying, for me personally, I have concerns. So even though, yes, it may come up in a scan, it just wouldn't be on my list right now of stocks to look at. Now, one that I'm just going to cycle through these. That's interesting. FMG. So we can see what the iron ore price has done. But one thing that I am particularly interested in, and here is a great example, is Newcrest. Now, we'll get into a bit later, but to do with what the gold price has done, and coincidentally what the gold price really has done since the 14th of May. But this is a great example of Sam's Davis box. And it's just box after box after box. And this is literally gold. And it's also another thing of why I keep notes when I'm doing my scans, because often you'll start finding some continuity. So another 2 stocks that are in the scans right now would be Rio Tinto. So this is also came up in Frank's scan. And another stock that is of interest was NST. So I'll just pull this up for you. And this is how quickly you can do it. Northern Star. So this is also a gold stock. And so both Northern Star and Rio are in both Guru box scans. And that's a very strong sign to me. So I will create a start for both stocks. So with Rio Tinto, for instance, as I say, it came up in Frank's scan. So I would then, I start once again changing around with the timelines a bit, having a look at the different perspective. And so Frank's is at 107 and Sam's also. So I'm probably a bit more, I'd probably go at 107. I know that there's not a huge difference here. It's over $1. but we can see that it's tried there. So for me, yeah, I would set my start, say thereabouts at 107. And if it broke and held that level, my start would then come into action. I think this this stock is looking very, very interesting overall. And so it's one that I'm very interested in. And so another stock as well. Let's have a look at something a bit. I think SHL again. So this is another example that SHL came up in both Guru scans. And so we're seeing with Northern Star, Rio, SHL. That's two different Guru toolboxes that's come up. That's a very strong sign to me. And so I would definitely put that on my watch list. I'm just going to move forward here very briefly. And I'm just going to change this time scale. So TCL, and this is just, let's look at this. This is just, once again, just box after box after box. Very strong. The OBV looks awesome. If you got it in there even at the start with the first box of 1250, look at it now. It's up 20%. It hasn't gone back. And there, it's just a wonderful example of how the both Sam's and Frank's Guru boxes can work very well for you. So, finally, on top of the two Guru boxes, I personally do my own scans. So now how I do these is I go on the magnifying glass and you'll see the scanning tools. And I'll just go for scan for patterns and events. Now this scan has worked for me very successfully for several years. And the great thing with the Protrader software is that it can be as simple or as complicated as you like it. I would be personally, I'm a volume trader. I think that volume is the most important indicator of possible price movement. And you see a lot of these patterns, I like to do that with the naked eye. But bearing in mind, I've been doing this for a while, so I don't like to use those. But for a lot of people who are starting out, and I know a lot of high-end traders, they will still use those. But say I have a very basic scan. Now also, please note that the biggest change here through my scans will be the Fibonacci in the time period. Now I only use 21, 34, and 55. So and once again, moving down, as I mentioned with the other scans, with the filters, I just don't even use the filters indicators because, as I say, I'm already using a watch list. So the filters don't really have much effect for me. So okay, I'm going to click scan. And there we go. So once again, once I've got there, we've got 32 scan results have come up. This is from the ASX200. And I will just click through and I'll just say I'll do this once a month. And this will start giving me an idea of what I may be interested in. What should I keep an eye on? Now, I'm just going to scroll through this very quickly so we can see EVN. Let me just be 1 second. I apologize. So once again, Northern Star. So this is now the third scan that's come up. It's come up in the two Gurus boxes. It's also come up in with my own scan. And as I say, I'll do two, maybe three different scans, and all I do is I change the period. But yeah, this is a very strong sign to me in terms of what to look for and what to keep an eye on for this month. Now, I also do a Davis box scan. So I just go down here, and this is my own Davis box. Now, once again, I only do two scan periods, and I won't change anything else. And this has worked very well for me. So I just Fibonacci. I like the 34 and the 55-day periods. And the reason why is because we are dealing with larger companies, I'm not interested in being caught in a seesaw price move. And I'm generally looking for stronger trends, stronger price movements. So the larger the box period, the stronger the box. And hopefully, hence, stronger the price move. So, okay, as we say it, and you can see here, my periods are slightly different than maybe others. And this is just to say, you can make your own decisions and your own values. This is just what has worked for me. So I click scan, and let's see. And so I've got 14 scans have from my own personal Davis scan. So ANZ's interesting. Now, once again, it had the box was reached here, But for me, it's just at the moment, with the way the market is in the finance sector, it's just not something that I'm interested in. So I just leave that. I just cycle through. I won't watch every single stock that is on my list. Now, BHP though is an example that I will put on my list because it's had 2 consecutive boxes. It's done very, very well for me. Really, this calendar year, BHP's been one of my better ones. And so, I'd probably set my start now at 42.35 for the next move. And just want to cycle through very quickly. Now, so Newcrest. So, if you look at Newcrest, this is just a classic example. So this goes all the way back to November, really. And it's just been box after box after box. And you'll see this when you start doing various scans, that you'll have the same stocks coming up. And so clearly there's a common denominator. When you start seeing stocks coming up in various scans, there's a common denominator. And that is that they're going up. And so that's a really strong sign. Now also, if you look, I'll keep on scrolling through it again. SHL. So Sonic Healthcare now has come up in every single scan. It's come up in the 2 Guru scans. It's come up in my normal scan plus my Dava scan. So that to me is a very strong sign. And I'll be keeping a very close eye on that. Another stock as well is TCL. And this is just more to show you in terms of, you can just see here, once again, it's just box after box that is so strong. It's just been great, really, this, certainly this calendar year for me. Now, one thing I do want to go back, and this is an awesome example of what we discussed today in terms of my strategy of how I use stops and how I use starts. So AWC, it came, I think up in one of my scans, may have been back in May. And so I'm just going to go, you can see the 12 months here. And so I believe I set my start at $2.48 on the 23rd of May. And so you can see around here I set my start at the 23rd of May. And you'll see it kissed it quite a few times on the 28th of May, and it tried again on June the 19th. And in fact, that then formed a long upper shadow, which from a candlestick perspective, it's a bearish signal. And, funny enough, look at what happens to this stock since. So this is a great example of how you use starts. So, it comes up in one of my scans. I then set my start and say, because it didn't close at or above the 247, I just didn't get in. And so I may keep that for the future, or I may just take it off my list altogether. But it's an awesome example of how to use starts. Now, the next thing that I'd like to touch on is the gold sector and gold stocks. So one of the 2 things that I had wanted to talk about is basically the gold and the gold price. There has been a lot of talk lately in the financial press about gold. And you'll probably see it in the general media over the next 3 months, and they start talking about the gold price movement. And how that will impact you with Protrader is you'll start seeing that a lot of gold stocks will start coming up in your scans, the Guru scans like Frank's and Sam's, and also the general Davis box. Now, if we take and you can see here, I've used the XG, the All Ords Gold Index, and you can see very clearly that, in May it broke through the 50 and the 100-day moving average, and then kind of the early June, it broke through its resistance, and has just not looked back since. It's just been straight up, and it's looking very, very strong. Now, we can see here, if we look at this 5-year chart, and you can start getting an idea why that it broke through around the 14th of May, this 1360 USD dollar level. And that was very, very important. And to give you an idea, using the 10-year chart here, you can see that it was basically, it's gold's now at a 6-year high. And it's had several attempts to break through that 1360 barrier and to the 1400 mark. And it's now doing that. And there's a lot of talk that the gold price will now kind of rally up to the 1600 US dollar mark. And there's clearly a lot of, a few factors at play here. One of them being the China buying, and also the low interest rate environment. As you would know, Australia is now at 1%, our official rates, and that's being seen throughout the world. And so a lot of people buy gold during low inflation environments. But what is also important to understand from our perspective is that for gold producers, the gold price immediately impacts upon their bottom line. So for every dollar that the gold price goes up, it's basically free money for the gold companies. They've already got all their operating costs in play. And so, without a single dollar increase to their operating costs, they're earning more money. And it's immediate. It's not an investment now for maybe a return in 6 months. Like this very quarter, they immediately see a benefit in their bottom line. And so naturally, this will impact positively on their fundamentals, such as their PE ratio, their market cap. And there's also a strong likelihood that with some of the bigger gold companies, this will even lead to dividend increases. And all of this, in turn, picks up interest with the institutions and then, of course, the retail sector. So this is a classic example. When I talk about how I use a top-down then bottom-up approach, this is a classic example of how I would use a macro factor or a macro issue to narrow down to a sector. And then once in that sector, i.e. the XGD, once in that sector, I'll then look for stocks that I like and that may interest me. Now, if we've seen today, things like Northern Star, we can see classically here that in May, it broke through those, the moving averages and then has broken through its recent high and has just, it's kept on going. It's now consolidating and you'll very likely, if the gold price goes, you'll very likely see a continual move. EVN is another one that is coming up a lot lately in scans. And once again, it's primarily due to the gold price. And all of these gold stocks, you'll just see time and time again over the last few months and moving forward will come up in scans. And even some of the smaller producers SAR, Saracen Mining, now, and also things like SBM, so St Barbara Mines. Some people will probably use this as an opportunity of, is now a time to get in. I'm not saying that one should or shouldn't, but you can start seeing that it's possibly turned a corner and maybe looking to start challenging certainly this price point of $3.25, but then to start challenging, filling in the gap and going back up to $4. And then for more the traders, what you'll start seeing is give it a few more months, and you'll then start seeing some movement now in the explorers and the smaller gold producers. So there you go. That's a classic example of how I use my strategy to pick my stocks. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.